All right. Good.
Okay, thank you for joining me tonight. So I'm going to go over some 2024 stats and data and cases and just kind of recap the year for us. So in 2024, we took in 2,476 patients of 148 species, and we got in approximately 7,817 calls from the public for that year. So compared to 2023 and 2022, we are definitely up in intakes, about 11% increase from 2022. So a lot of patients have come in 2024. It seems like every year we're getting in more and more animals. So these are intakes looking at by month. So you can see we start off pretty strong in January, but by the time we get to April, there is a big spike in intakes, and that is because of spring baby bird season. April is the peak month for that, and that's where we're getting in the most calls for injured, orphaned, or kidnapped baby birds. We stayed pretty strong in the 200s in May, June, July, August. A little bit of a dip in September, but by that time, fall migration is ramping up. And so you can see in October, another big spike with 266 patients admitted because of all the fall migrants coming through, getting injured or suffering migration fatigue. We're getting a lot of calls for those kinds of animals. So yeah, and then it kind of drops down, and December you can say is kind of a breather, but not really. We're pretty busy anyway throughout the year. And then these are intakes by class, so looking at birds versus mammals versus reptiles for 2024 and the 2 years prior. So in 2024, we took in 1,649 birds compared to the 2 years prior where we were around 1,400 birds. And then in 2024, we took in 792 mammals, which is an increase from 2023 and 2022. And even though we don't get in a lot of reptiles in general, we did have a few more reptiles in 2024 compared to the previous 2 years. So again, overall increasing every year with animal intakes. So now looking specifically at birds and their breakdown for 2024, we took in 247 raptors, 319 seabirds, 189 shorebirds, 745 songbirds, and 7 waterfowl. So songbirds are the biggest family or the biggest order in birds. They have the most subspecies, just the most numbers, so it makes sense that they're going to be the most that we see. And again, baby bird season, we're getting an influx of nests falling down from the tree and getting hurt. So we get in a lot of songbirds every year. And then the waterfowl, we don't get in many. Mostly they're going to be migrating sea ducks that get washed off and go up on the beaches. But that for the pictures on the top there, we have a swallow-tailed kite, we have a barn swallow, and then we have a nest of northern mockingbirds, and then below are red-shouldered hawk and a broad-winged hawk side by side. You can kind of see the difference in them. And looking at bird intakes by month. So again, April and October are those big spikes. That's when we're getting in the most birds because of baby season and migrating season during those times. But pretty steady throughout the year in general in terms of bird intakes. And that bottom right picture there is actually a male northern harrier. So that is a rare admission for us. We don't get those guys in very much at all. He came in for trauma-related injuries, so it's pretty cool to see that guy come in. So our most common raptor for 2024 was the eastern screech owl with 69 admitted. Most of these are going to be the babies that fall out of their tree or their trees cut down. So we get quite a few baby screech owls every year. So that middle picture is actually a baby screech owl. They're little white fluff balls when they're babies, and then as they get older, they get the dark coloration in the feathers. The other two pictures are juvenile screech owls as well. The most common songbird we see is the northern mockingbird with 146 admitted. It's a pretty common songbird in South Florida, so during baby bird season, those are a lot of the nests that are getting disturbed and a lot of the babies that are coming in. So they're one of our common songbirds. I think the second common is the blue jay, which was like 130, I think that was admitted. Most common seabird is the laughing gull with 119 admitted. A lot of laughing gulls a year. These guys are increasingly becoming more urbanized. You're seeing them more and more off the beaches and more hanging around lakes and small bodies of water and getting into trouble. That bottom right picture is actually a laughing gull in breeding colors. So their head turns black when they're in breeding season, and then it will be white again when they're not. And our most common shorebird was the white ibis with 68 admitted. These guys will come in for weakness, but we do see them a lot with trauma-related injuries. They do like to look for lizards and stuff on the side of roads, and then they'll get hit by cars and things like that. So that ibis on the right is juvenile, so they're more brown when they're young, and then when they reach full maturity is when they turn white. Now looking at mammals for 2024, we pretty much mostly get in gray squirrels and Virginia opossums. So in 2024, we got in 566 possums and 207 squirrels. Compared to 2023, 2022, our possum intakes have been increasing. In 2023, I don't recall what was going on that we got in way more squirrels than usual, but in general, we stay around the 200s for the squirrels. So in 2022, we had 204, so kind of on par. And looking at mammal intakes by month, so squirrels have 2 breeding seasons, lucky for us, a spring and a fall. So we see a spike in April and a spike in August, so that makes sense for the most part. We're getting more baby squirrels around that time. Possums breed year-round for the most part, but sometimes we do see an increase in the spring months. But yeah, you can see pretty steady with the mammals throughout the year for the most part. January, December are usually our lowest in terms of mammal intakes. And that bottom picture there is a mama possum with babies in her pouch. I don't know if you can kind of tell, they're really small, but you can see the tails sticking out. So you guessed it, most common mammal possum. Most common mammal intake are the possums. They come in groups usually. If mom's hit by a car and she had babies in the pouch, all of a sudden we have 10 baby possums admitted that day. So that's why we get so many of them in. In general, they do really well when they come in just orphaned, but it just depends. They do come in with a lot of issues sometimes, especially if they have been on dead mom for a long time. They'll come in with some illnesses. And now the reptiles, again, we don't get many reptiles, but we got in more last year compared to previous years. So 35 reptiles last year, 31 in 23, and 25 in 2022. That top right picture was an interesting case. I think in 2022, there was 2 turtles that was found in the ocean chained together, and they were brought to us for treatment, and it was very, very strange. And that bottom picture is a cougar there.
Top picture made the news.
Yeah.
That, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then looking at their intakes by the month, there's no real pattern for them. Usually they're like crossing the road and they get hit by a car, or people try to move them or pick them up thinking something's wrong, or really they could have just helped them across the street. I'm not sure what happened in July. I believe those intakes were just like a couple cooters of softshell, a gopher tortoise. Um, I think most reptiles' breeding season is in the spring. I think cooters are year round. But again, there's not a whole lot of reptile intakes to see a whole lot of pattern for the most part. So yeah. And our most common reptile admitted was the gopher tortoise with 11. So if you don't know, these guys are federally protected. So when they come in, we can't release them until we get special permission from FWC. They'll let us know where they can go, whether it is back in the wild or if it's a what's called a wave site or a holding site before they're ready to go. So these guys are pretty hardy. They do really well, but they end up being with us for a long time because we're just waiting for FWC to give us the go to let them go. And that picture on the left is actually a gopher tortoise with a shell deformity. You can see it compared to the other two pictures where they're just kind of nice and smooth and kind of flat shaped, and she's really bubbly and rough looking. So that tortoise must have been in captivity somewhere for a long time in poor conditions, unfortunately. So our most prevalent patients for 2024 were the Virginia opossum, the northern mockingbird, the laughing gull, the gray squirrel, and the blue jay. Those are our most admitted patients for the year. So where are these animals coming from? We get in calls from all over Miami, even from like Broward, sometimes from Palm Beach County, and we do what we can to get the animals to us and get them help. Looking at the numbers, these were just the cities or the municipalities that popped up the most. Miami Beach was the biggest for intakes. That's where a lot of our animals were coming from generally. And then we have Key Biscayne, Homestead, Hialeah, Doral, Cutler Bay, Coral Gables, South and North Miami Beach, and Miami Shores. So these are the hotspots for where we're getting calls for injured animals and where they're being found. And why are they admitted? So we have 4 broad categories that we will put down for a reason for admission: trauma, sickness and weakness, orphan baby, trapped, entangled. Trauma being the biggest with 949 patients admitted, followed by sickness, weakness, 719, orphan, 671, and trapped, entangled, 55. Trauma will range from being hit by car to cat and dog attacks, window strikes. Sickness, weakness can be general weakness, botulism poisoning, rodenticide. Orphan babies, usually they, as it says, they're orphaned or they fell from the nest and they couldn't be reunited with parents, so we end up keeping them to raise. And trapped entanglement are like fishing line and hook related injuries, stuck on a fence, things like that. Looking specifically at trauma, these were the reasons of trauma that were the most common. Cat attacks being the most common reason for trauma. So there's a lot of feral cats in Miami, and there's a lot of people who have their cats outside and they're attacking these animals and injuring them. Physical trauma in general, so they come in with wounds or signs of trauma, but we don't know exactly what happened to them. Window strikes is a big one that happens during migration. Unfortunately, we have a lot of sound pollution, a lot of light pollution, and a lot of birds migrate at night, so they're getting disoriented, running into walls and buildings. Dog attacks, hit by car, and then head trauma is generally they're showing signs of neurologic trauma, but we don't know exactly what caused it, so we just kind of put head trauma as the reason. And that top picture is a really good example. That was an ovenbird that flew into a window and suffered some really bad trauma. He was very swollen in the head, eyes were swollen, infected, and he was on laser therapy, oxygen therapy, medication supported care. And after a few days, his swelling went down dramatically. His eye was able to open. He was doing a lot better. He was able to be released. And that bottom picture is another rare admission for us. It's a swallowtail kite that we got transferred from another facility. He suffered some sort of trauma where he couldn't fly. Luckily, it wasn't too serious. He just needed some pain meds, supportive care, and he was able to be released. We did want to talk about gunshot victims. So that is something that we do see quite often.
Are you talking about babies?
Yeah, BB pellets. Sometimes the animal comes in and we discover they have a BB pellet that is not necessarily related to why they're in, so they must have been living with it for a while. And sometimes they come in with BB pellets that obviously did cause injury. So that left picture, where all the red circles are, or where I circled BB pellets. That left picture was a Cooper's hawk. Unfortunately, that BB pellet did a lot of damage to his torquoid and clavicle area. The picture next to him is a vulture that came in with multiple little pellets, maybe like shotgun pellets. And he had an old healed fracture that he had from one of them. The next picture after it is a BB pellet in the wing that fractured that bird's wing. And then the last one on the right were a couple BB pellets in the leg that caused some issues. For 2025, we're trying to be more detailed and kind of really keep track of these BB pellet patients and where they're being found and things like that, and try to work with FWC to see if anything can be done about it. So to talk a little bit about the rehabilitation process, we have rescue, intake, supportive care, housing, enrichment, behavior, and release. So depending on what's going on, why the animal came in, there'll be a few different things that will happen. But generally, the first thing that happens is the rescue. So we'll get calls from all over, like I said, for various reasons. Sometimes animals don't need help, there's no intervention needed, but a lot of times there is intervention that's needed. This left picture was an interesting call. There was 2 possums that fell in the bay under a bridge. Those red circles are where the possums are, if you can kind of tell. And we had a volunteer that went out to go get them, and the finder was amazing and jumped in the water and was able to grab those guys. So they came to us. Luckily, they didn't have any major issues. They weren't aspirated. There wasn't much going on. It just seemed like they fell in the water and they couldn't get out. So after about a week, those guys were released. That top picture next to it is a great blue heron that got entangled with some rope, really bad around the beak. And it took a while to get that guy because he was still flying. He was still strong for a while. And we had to wait till he was weaker to get him. And then the bottom, the picture under that one is a hawk that was netted. So our volunteers have nets and carriers. They're trained to rescue and handle animals. That top right picture is me responding to a Pelican call. Back when we had our rescue van, we have a rescue car now. That's fine. And then that bottom picture is an osprey that was weakened down, and one of our staff went out to grab him. So once the animal comes to us, we'll do an intake exam. We're looking for hydration, wounds, evidence of shock, body condition fractures or feather condition, if there's neurological issues, anything like that. Sometimes on intake, those first few hours might just be oxygen, pain meds, and hands off for a little bit while they de-stress. The animal's already stressed from being injured or being sick, and then they were stressed from being captured and being transported. So when they come to us, we assess their stress. And if we can't do the whole entire exam right then and there, we definitely will give them a break, we'll give them some time, and maybe a few hours later, we'll finish the exam and figure out what's going on. That top picture is a great blackback gull that came in, which is another rare admission for us. We don't get them in very much, and they're really big gulls that are here in Florida, but we just don't get them in very often. So part of the intake is diagnosis. So we are trying to figure out what's going on. Sometimes it's pretty straightforward. Someone found a bird, they saw it get hit by a car, so we know the bird got hit by a car. But sometimes, a lot of times, the animals are found and there's not really a known reason why they're down and out, why they got trauma. So one of the main things that we'll do is take radiographs. So in 2024, we took 646 radiographs. We probably would have taken more, but there was some days where our X-ray machine was down, so we couldn't take rats at that time. But it's really helpful to look for fractures, look at their lung fields, any abnormalities, anything like that. We'll do blood work, some of it in-house, some more in-depth blood work we can send to the lab, fecal tests, crop swabs, to look for other types of parasites. Mostly those are going to be the hawks, doves, and the crows. We'll look at their eyes, do eye stains, look for ulcers, inflammation, and we'll do culture and sensitivity that we can send out to the lab for really infected wounds to try to decide which antibiotic is best suited for them. So that top right picture is actually our newest equipment, is an EKG machine. And that's actually our ambassador possum that passed recently when she had her heart condition. So we hooked her up to EKG, the blood pressure, to get some vitals to see how she was doing. So that piece of equipment's been really, really helpful for us for surgeries and whatnot. And then that bottom left picture is a picture of X-ray. So that was a vulture that came in. It was found with a droopy wing, not really sure what's going on. And then on X-ray, we discovered that there was a fracture in the ulna there. And then once we figure out what's going on, we will come up with a treatment plan for the animal. And so the animal will get that treatment while they're in care. And it can range, but it might be fluid therapy, pain management, antibiotics, a dewormer, wound management, laser therapy, oxygen therapy. There might be a splint or a wrap. They might have nutritional issues, so they'll get some vitamins or supplements. That top left picture is an osprey getting some oral medication. The picture next to it is a vulture getting a blood transfusion. And then the picture to the right of that is a cormorant that was getting some wound care. And then under that on the right is a laughing gull that was getting some laser therapy for a wing injury while he was under anesthesia. And then that middle picture is a screech owl that had to get a little splint and wrap for a leg fracture. And then that last picture on the bottom left is a mockingbird that also had a little pin and a little wrap for an injury. Yeah.
You give them blood transfusion. Where do you get the blood from?
So we'll get the blood from other healthier birds, either that are in rehab, or sometimes we'll use our permanents, like our permanent pelicans, and they'll be donors for us for giving the blood.
And can you give like pelican blood to a vulture?
You can, yeah. As long as we'll just keep it from bird to bird. So usually that's the general rule. Birds and wildlife in general don't have like blood types per se, like people. So there's some like leeway with that kind of thing. Yeah, it's really cool when we don't do it like super often, but every now and then our vet's like, let's give it a try, let's see, is it a super anemic bird or something. And I don't think that guy made it ultimately, but it did kind of make him last a little longer.
Did you ever give a bird human blood?
I don't think you can. I don't think it would work that way. It's a good question.
I'm joking.
That's a good question. I can ask my vet about that. And so approximately 657 patients received laser therapy in 2024. 625 received oxygen therapy, and about 191 patients had a splint or a wrap of some kind. These are kind of rough estimates from our online program that we have. In 2025, we're trying to really kind of pinpoint and keep better track of these things so we can really see where our numbers are and like how often we're using these treatments and protocols, things like that. So the left picture is a Cooper's hawk that had some foot damage, some foot issues. So in one foot it's wrapped up, and then the other foot's getting laser therapy, and then that foot would be wrapped up too. The middle picture is a burrowing owl that had a really thick splint on, leg wrap for fracture. And then that picture on the right is a turn, also getting laser therapy for his
What
pain.
is the laser therapy?
Oh, yeah, so it helps with oxygen coming to the area, which will help promote healing. There's different settings, so we can set it with the red light, as you can see, and that really promotes healing and growth. There's also a blue light setting that will help like kill bacteria and fungus. And there's a setting to help with pain and inflammation. So we got laser therapy a few years ago and have been using it more often. And anecdotally, I like to say that it is helping. We are seeing faster healing with wounds, recovery with like head trauma and things like that. Um, but yeah, there's still some testing and stuff that needs to happen. I think vet clinics in general are starting to use it more. I've seen there's more papers out there with like laser therapy studies. So it's really interesting to see.
Is there a pretty good rate of success with the wrapping of the?
Yeah, for sure. Especially with like fractures and things like that. Stabilization is key for healing. We don't do a lot of pinning surgeries. We definitely do more than we used to. But if an animal can't get a pin to fix a fracture, then a splint and a wrap is definitely the next best thing.
Because it has to perch, right, to be released.
Yeah. Birds need to be able to perch properly. And another thing is like their mating behavior. Male birds will get on top of females to mate, so they need to be able to be steady and be able to do that. And so same with the mammals, they have to be able to climb and run and things like that. So for surgeries and procedures, we did over 400 in 2024. And it can be as simple as cleaning up a wound and suturing up, or pinning a bone, or removing a hook from a pelican's stomach. So sometimes it takes a few minutes, sometimes it can be a procedure that takes an hour or two, it just depends. So this picture on the left is a hawk that got a pin. You can kind of see it sticking out of the elbow there. It's in the ulnar bone that he had a fracture there, and our vet decided to put a pin in there to speed up the healing process. And then the picture next to it is a pelican getting a wound debriding and treatment. So he's under anesthesia. He's all hooked up to the EKG machine and everything. The picture next to it is a cormorant, also getting some wound debriding and suturing. And then the top right picture was a little baby possum that had a really bad hand laceration. And so our vet cleaned it up and put a couple of sutures in there. And that bottom picture is a possum that was sedated for a procedure, and she's hooked up to the EKG machine and everything. And so supportive care is another thing that these animals might need. So they might need daily subcutaneous fluids, tubing liquid diets before they can move on to whole foods, hydrotherapy to help with their feathers, or just getting them in the water if they're a water bird to get them moving their legs, dawn baths if they have contaminants on their feathers, flight conditioning, especially if they have had a broken limb for a while, they've been wrapped up, we want to get that limb stronger, get that wing stronger, so get them outside for flight conditioning. So that bottom left picture is a laughing gull in swim time. Sometimes water birds just can't go outside yet for a variety of reasons, so we want to get them in water as soon as possible. So we'll just fill up a big tub with lukewarm water, and we'll let them swim around, kick their feet. A lot of times they like it, and they'll start bathing, and it's really good for their feathers. The picture next to it is a blue-winged teal getting some subcutaneous fluids on the back. That top picture next is a squirrel getting feeding. So when we have the orphans, a lot of the times it's just keeping them fed, hydrated, and warm as they get older. The picture next to him is a sanderling getting a bath. He had a lot of contaminants on his feathers, so he's getting a dawn bath to help with that. And that bottom picture is, I believe, that same blue-winged teal getting tube feeding some diets. So when they come in thin or emaciated, they usually start off on a liquid diet first, before they move on to whole foods or their normal diet they would get out in the wild.
Yeah, when you guys have orphans, do you, and they need to be fed, do you do them all here or do you farm them out to foster animals?
We do them all here. We do have some baby feeding volunteers that come in and help us as well during the feeding times. But for the most part, it's all at the station, getting them all fed. And so another part of the rehab process is the animal's behavior and enrichment while they're in care. They're in an abnormal environment, they're not in the wild, and this is especially true for baby animals that get raised. We want to make sure that they know what to do once they do get released. So when they're in care, they'll get a lot of different kinds of enrichment to mimic that wild habitat. So the left picture, bottom left, is a squirrel. So he has some greenery in the habitat, there's some sticks in the background, and he's eating food on a grass mat. So we don't offer them plates or bowls, we'll give them grass mats so they can just forage on the floor, eat from the floor like they would in the wild. And then the picture next to it is a dove eating from what we call seed bottle. So if you don't know doves and pigeons, they pretty much will put their whole face in mom's mouth, and then mom will regurgitate all the food, and that's how they eat. So baby pigeons and doves, you can't just give them a bowl and say, here, eat. We try to mimic that, so we'll put vet wrap around a seed bottle with seeds, and there's a little hole in there, and they just instinctually know to put their face in that hole and to eat the seed that way. The top picture next to that is a group of mockingbirds that are inside, but they have a lot of sticks and trees, greenery for them to perch on, and get used to perching on sticks and things like that. That picture below it is some gulls in our outside gull pen that has sand. There's a corner where there's rocks, there's trees in there for hiding, for perching. They have access to water, bay water, so they have the salt water access. That top right picture is a gopher tortoise. So those guys like to burrow, and our cages aren't really built for burrowing tortoises, so we'll give them carrier tops. And it's kind of like a little hidey hole for them, and they love to be in there. And sometimes they'll dig under there, trying to burrow, but they can't really go anywhere. And then that bottom picture is a group of crows, which corvids are very smart. They get bored very easily, so we will give them little parrot toys and stuff along with natural enrichment, so they have something to do. Because once they get bored, that's when they start getting into trouble. They start trying to escape and they hurt themselves, or they're fighting with each other, or things like that. And then finally release, the best part, the last part of the rehab process. So while an animal's with us, depending on why they came in, they're getting periodical checks while they're in care, looking for their original reason for coming in. Is that healed? Is their behavior normal for that species? Is their body condition good? Can they ambulate normally? Can they fly? Can they climb? Can they run? If it's a bird, we'll do flight tests, especially if they have been healing from a fracture. Water birds get waterproofing tests to make sure their waterproofing is perfect before release. A lot of our squirrels will get teeth checks before release to make sure there isn't any overgrowth going on or any issues. Is their vision perfect? Especially if they have come in with eye issues, we want to make sure that they are visual before they go. We do work with animal eye guys, and they help us a lot with a lot of our eye patients. And do they recognize predators? Are they afraid of people? Are they afraid of dogs and things like that? Do they recognize their own species? Are they going to know that they're a mockingbird and that they can hang with mockingbirds? Or are they going to fight with the mockingbirds because they think they're human type thing? So that top left picture is a squirrel. With squirrels, we mostly do soft releases for them, just because they need a little extra monitoring before they fully go out in the wild. So we have a team of volunteers with nice big backyards and trees that will take soft release squirrels for them. We'll put nest boxes in there. Usually they'll stay in there a few days, and most of the time they kind of move on and we don't really see them again. They kind of do their thing. Every now and then we'll have a group that is in there for like a week or more before they move on. And the top right picture were two night herons that we got in. They came in at separate times. They became buddies while they were in care, and they luckily were released ready at the same time. So we released them at the same time, and I believe when they got released, they came out and then they were like talking to each other and like being all like cutesy and stuff, and then they flew off and did their thing. And then the bottom pictures are a gull and a pelican getting released back into the wild. So there's a few cases that I wanted to point out that were like highlights for 2024. So this pelican came in with a beak fracture from Hollover Marina. He also had a pouch fracture, which you can see on that right picture. The pouch tear was pretty big. The fracture was on the left side of the bill there, the red circle, and it was pretty unstable. So he came in thin. He obviously hasn't been able to hunt for a while. These guys were plunge divers, so they need to dive for their fish. And with the way his beak and his pouch was, he hadn't been eating for a while. So our vet did an external fixator, which is that middle picture there. You can see like the blue tube attached to the side of the bill. So basically we put 2 pins on either side of the fracture site. You put that plastic tube and then we filled it with this acrylic substance that hardened. And it basically kept the fracture stabilized while it healed. And we were doing wound care on the fracture site on the inside as well to make sure there wasn't anything going on. And then eventually his pouch healed on his own. We didn't really have to do much intervention. Pouches actually healed really well if given with time. And his fracture healed as well from the left picture there. So after 59 days in care, this pelican was able to be released.
Is that a long time versus a normal?
For a pelican, it's on the longer side for sure. Usually they might be like more closer to like a month or so. So this guy, was a little bit longer than usual. And then we have this Eastern Screech Owl 443 that was admitted in March. He suffered head trauma. His tree that he was in was cut and it fell, and he must have been in one of the cavities in there. So he was found with severe head trauma. He was very ataxic, thrashing about. He didn't have control of his body. He had what's called torticollis, where his head kind of was twisted around. So we were treating him for that. He also had eye ulcers and issues. He trashed his feathers. So by the time his head trauma was recovering, he still had to recover from the eyes. By the time his eyes recovered, he still had to recover from the feathers. So we had to wait for a full molt before he could be released. He also went through live prey testing to make sure that he still knows how to hunt and find prey. So that picture on the right is him like normal now, like peeking his head out of the hole. That bottom picture is him after he was a little more normal. He still has the tilt, as you can see, but he was able to eat on his own at that point. So after 269 days in care, this owl was finally released. And that's a long time to be in care.
It's amazing too, they don't get imprinted after all this.
This guy was feisty like the whole way through. He hated all of us. And that's good. I think luckily, because he came in as an adult, if he had come in younger, it might have been more of an issue, I think. And then this Bonaparte's gull that came in February, unable to fly and weak. Around that time, we actually got in like 12 Bonaparte's gull. There was some weather activity out there in the ocean that had blown a bunch off course. So this guy came in, he had bumblefoot issues, so he had sores on his feet, which indicates that he was grounded for a while. He hadn't been flying. His feathers on his left wing were all trashed, which you can kind of see in this picture here. You can still see it. There is evidence of new feather growth there, so that was a good sign for us. So we got him stronger. We were getting his feet taken care of. The only thing we were waiting for was his feathers. He had to molt his feathers out. And there was a lot of debate whether we transfer him up to a center where they were, because at this point he had missed migration and they already were up north in Canada. or if we just hold him over until the next migration season. We talked to a few other centers, and it was decided to hold him over and just kind of keep really close watch of his feet and his body condition and everything. And that top picture, you can see his head is kind of going black. So normally it's a white head. So at this point, he actually went into breeding plumage and went out of breeding plumage because he was with us so long. And eventually in October, he got released. So after 241 days, he was released back into the wilds, which was pretty exciting because of all the Bonaparte's gulls that came in, he was the only survivor for that year. So it was very interesting to see this process and kind of have this gull make it. They're pretty similar to laughing gulls, they're just on the smaller side. And he was in a cage with laughing gulls, terns, cormorants, big hair, lesser blackback gulls, and he was holding his own and he was doing great. So we're pretty happy about that. And so to sum up 2024, these were the new patients that we admitted. So these birds we had never admitted before. So 2024 was the first time we got them in. One of the highlights was the Atlantic puffin. If you guys saw the news story about that, that was pretty exciting. Unfortunately, that one didn't make it, but it was very strange to have one float up to us. The grasshopper sparrow, far right, is also like a big one for us because they are like threatened and everything. So it was really weird for that guy to be even down in South Florida. I think we're mostly in Central Florida. But yeah, it was pretty cool to see all these new birds for the year. Most of them, I think, were either migrants blown off course or like window stripe gunners.
Sorry, what was the puffin?
So they apparently puffins migrate like far off the coast of Florida, and some weather events blew this guy off course, and he washed up on shore. So he came to us like super thin, super weak, and emaciated. And so we started supportive care treatment for him, but unfortunately he passed away after a few days. So thank you for your support. And there are some events coming up, Seabirds on the Bay cruises. If you haven't been on one, definitely go on one. And our biggest fundraising gala is coming up in March, Pelican Party. So definitely check out our website for tickets for that to continue support. Actually, this picture is a pelican being released on the Seabird cruise, so that's cool there. So yeah, are there any questions?
How are you funded?
We are a nonprofit, so we run on donations from the public. We do apply for grants, which help us out a lot, but it's mostly donations from people in the community that really help us do our work. Yeah.
Good presentation, thank you, that was interesting.
Thank you.
I have a million questions, I'm gonna try
Shoot, let them go.
So I'm assuming that with the increasing population in South Florida, there's probably a decreasing animal population. And maybe that's true or not, but it seems like your numbers are rising. Do you attribute that to more animals being more publicity about your existence?
I think it's a mix of both. I think we are getting out in the community more, so more people are knowing about us and finding out where they can bring animals. But on the flip side, I think there is a lot more injuries going on because there's more people, more construction, more cars. So I think it's a mix of both, but I can't say for sure if it's more one way or the other. But yeah, it's a good question. Any other questions?
Are you the only center in the area that does this kind of work?
In the Miami area, yes. There's a smaller center down in the Homestead area. He's more of a home rehabber. He's not available all the time, but he does do quite a bit of work. And then besides us, the next center is in Broward County.
Isn't there one in the Keys?
Oh yeah, there's one way down in the Keys
Yeah,
in
I
Marathon.
think see that.
Yeah, yep, for sure. But we pretty much are the main one for Miami-Dade County. And I think last year we got in like 50 patients from Broward and like several patients from Palm Beach County for whatever reason. Yeah. Any other questions?
How many animals didn't make it? You see.
That's a good question. I think Our release rates are around like 60 something percent. So more animals are making it than not for sure. But I don't know the exact number on how many don't make it. Unfortunately, there are a lot that don't make it, and that's part of the rehab process as well. But
So,
sorry, go ahead.
We do have one of the highest release rates, I think, around, like, I think Julie checked recently, it was close to 68%.
Yeah.
Which is pretty high.
what about, where do you release the possums?
So it's tricky for releases. So
Want one?
I know. So in general, for adults, we try to get them back within a mile or two of where they're found. For young ones, it can kind of go wherever there's appropriate habitat. But we just try our best to find the most appropriate park nearby, appropriate habitats for them to go. It's really tricky because, one time we had a possum that was found in the middle of downtown, and it's like, we can't release them back there, we gotta take them somewhere new. So we just try to find the best type of suitable habitat as much as possible, for sure.
I was just gonna add, when you do a release, you realize how little habitat there is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. It's
For
like,
sure.
how do you release them into somewhere that they won't cross the street again?
Yeah.
Because it's just everything.
Yeah.
It's tricky. Good question. Yeah.
I told you I had one. So, if you have a young animal that comes in, a young bird, and they get imprinted with humans, do you release those?
No.
What
We
happens to them?
cannot release them. Luckily, that isn't an issue that happens with us very commonly. If it is something that happens, then you have to get a secondary opinion from another rehabber, and then you have to decide if that is something reversible and you have to transfer them out, or is it a candidate for placements and they can be education somewhere. But if it is a permanent imprinting, I guess, then they definitely can't be released. So you just have to find a placement or make the call if you feel necessary to euthanize. Yeah, it's hard, and habituation is a lot easier to reverse than an animal being truly imprinted. So luckily, imprinting doesn't happen very often. Habituation might along the way, but it's definitely reversible, especially once animals get into the outside habitats and they're more hands off. They'll wild up pretty quick. Yeah. Good question.
You said you have permanents as well?
Yes, yeah, we do have several permanent pelicans that live on site. We have a permanent screech owl, a gray horned owl, 2 box turtles, and a gopher tortoise. And then we just lost our permanent ambassador possum, but we recently have another one that we think is going to be a good candidate. So these animals were deemed non-releasable at whatever point in the rehab process, and they were deemed suitable for education. So we have the space, we had the resources, and these are the ones that we kept. But sometimes they get transferred out to other places like zoos or other centers.
And all this work is done over there?
Yeah, over there, in the little corner there. Yeah, and we're open to the public, so you can come check us out and walk around and everything. Sure, I know about it every day.
Free tours on Saturdays at 11, I think.
Oh, okay, good.
If you get an animal in and it's quite freaked out, do you have specific tricks to calm it down?
So we can use sedation if we really need to for exams. I definitely have done that for like the mama possums that like go wild and crazy because they're mama possums. For the most part, proper handling and restraint is good enough. But we can use sedation or anesthesia if they are strong enough. If we need to do, draw blood, exams, take X-rays, just to not stress them out for sure. But yeah, mostly it's those two things and just proper handling and restraint.
So I asked you because I brought a couple birds in and it was challenging to get them.
Yeah.
And you feel like in chasing them, you feel like you're cranking them up.
Yeah.
And I don't know is there a way to catch them that is less stressful for them?
I don't think so. I think the catching process is going to be stressful no matter what. If it's something where they, have an injured leg but they can fly, it's going to be hard because they're going to fly off. And sometimes you just have to wait till they're weaker in some regard until you can catch it with a net or catch it with a towel. But I think in general, unless, someone goes out there with a dart gun, which is something we don't really do, I think it's gonna be stressful no matter what. And so it's just a matter of managing that stress like after the fact and just trying to keep them calm after.
It stresses me.
Yeah, I feel that. Any other questions? Yeah, no? Okay. Well, thank you. I think that's it then. Thank you.